Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace be unto you and Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this Pillars pop-up conversation. Tonight we are reimagining community with Believers Bailout. My name is Kalia Abiade. I'm the Managing Director for Strategy and Partnerships at the Pillars Fund. And I'm so pleased to be with you tonight and be guiding us through this conversation with Kamilah, Pickett, and Sana Ali. Every Thursday, we've been gathering here at 6 p.m. Eastern for the Pillars Pop-Up Conversations, a series that's designed to highlight the ways American Muslims are using imaginative storytelling and cultural production to advance social change. We've been here throughout Ramadan, and for 2 weeks beyond, we'll be gathering here on Facebook Live with Muslim activists, storytellers, and story changers to learn more about their work and how we can all make a difference together. Next week, we're so thrilled that Omar Afendam will be joining us for a conversation about how we can use storytelling as a form of healing. Following that, post-Ramadan, we'll be speaking with Hanif Abdurraqib, who is a poet, an author, and cultural critic, and also one of this year's United States Artists Fellows. And he'll be in conversation with our Executive Director, Kashif Sheikh, about the role of art and artists in social change. And that's a conversation that you also won't want to miss. And then finally, on June 4th, we'll be wrapping up this part of the series with Rami Youssef of the show by his own name, Rami, along with Arij Mikati, who is one of our other team members here at Pillars, and then writers from the show from season 2. And by then, you'll have been able to catch a glimpse of season 2 on Hulu. The show premieres just a few days after Eid. So please be sure to check that out before joining us on June 4th. For tonight, we encourage you to follow along on social media right here on Facebook Live. You can also join us on Twitter. We're using the hashtag Pillars Pop-Up. And of course, you can post your comments right here in the live. Near the end of the program, we will be taking your questions, so feel free to share them throughout the event, and we will make sure to get to those at the end. Before we formally get started, I just want to share a little bit about Pillars. Now, I can't believe that I'm in my 4th year of working with this organization, but for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we're a community-based grant-making organization that supports American Muslim leaders and organizations all across the United States. So from right here in Chicago to San Diego, to Atlanta, to Minnesota, to the East Coast. And we really are so privileged to work with an amazing community of grantees, leaders and artists and activists and storytellers who, as you all know, are just really putting in the work, especially right now, and especially during Ramadan. So during these last 10 nights, we ask that you just send them a little extra love right now as we're all getting through this together. Also at Pillars this year, in response to the outbreak of COVID-19, we launched a fund for Muslim artists and activists, which is a little outside of what we normally do. Normally, we do support organizations that are working in communities. And because so many of our community members have really been hit hard by this public health and economic crisis, we launched a rapid response fund to support artists and activists who were facing financial constraints that have been exacerbated or brought on by this pandemic and the ensuing lockdown. So please subscribe to our mailing list to learn more about that and to stay updated with the latest. So here at Pillars, one of my primary responsibilities has always been to work with the amazing cohort of grantees that we have. And as I mentioned, now I'm going into our 4th year of doing that. So it's my absolute privilege to share with you tonight one of our newest grantees, Believers Bailout, and the 2 representatives we have tonight. We're really excited to have a conversation not only about how we can get more involved and learn more about what Believers Bailout does and get involved with their Ramadan campaign, but also how they're using storytelling to really shed a light on the harms of mass incarceration and also to imagine this world well beyond it. So I was reading this week on Facebook, a Facebook friend of mine, Debbie, posted something about a friend of hers who is currently incarcerated. And this line that she included just really stuck out to me, just saying prison is a pandemic, right? And I think, with 2.3 million people currently incarcerated in the United States, jails and in prisons, this COVID-19 pandemic is really shining a bright light on the harms that are happening in our jails, in our prisons, in our immigration detention centers, people who are locked up in the US continue to contract and die from this coronavirus at rates alarmingly higher than the rest of the population. And while much is said about the presumption of innocence in criminal legal systems around the world, the reality is that many people in the United States are held in jails indefinitely before any trial, simply because they cannot afford bail. People in pretrial incarceration can lose their jobs, their children, their homes, and even their lives. And this Ramadan, just as they have the past 2 years, Believers Bailout is raising awareness in Muslim communities primarily about the harms of this current criminal legal system. And like I said, what possibilities lie beyond it, and raising money right now to free Muslims who are being held before trial. And Believers Bailout is a community-led effort to bail Muslims in pretrial incarceration, bail Muslims out of pretrial incarceration in ICE custody. BBO was formed 2 years ago in 2018 by Muslim scholars and community members in conjunction with Sapelo Square and the Chicago Community Bond Fund. They began posting bonds in Chicago's Cook County Jail, the largest single-site jail in the United States, and one of the largest sites of this coronavirus outbreak right now. And they currently post pretrial and immigration incarceration bonds across the United States. And we'll also get to talk today a little bit about how BBO is currently run by a national collective of volunteers, and just how they do their work and why that's part of their success so far. So we are honored and grateful to be joined by our guests tonight and to break down a few concepts for sure and share how they're using art and artistic practice to imagine this future and how we can all get involved. So first I'll JD MPH, who's also an artist, racial equity trainer, and public health advocate who specializes in providing technical assistance that enables organizations to be more intentional and advancing racially equitable outcomes in both operations and programming. And for any of you who are involved in the nonprofit world in any way, know how important that is right now. Has always been, but especially now. She's been advocating at the intersections of race, health, and justice for more than a decade and is committed to nurturing the physical, mental, and social and spiritual wellness of the communities that have nurtured her. Since 2009, Kamilah has crisscrossed the United States and traveled internationally as a performer, writer, and workshop facilitator for the Hijabi Monologues. She also co-curates the Flowers podcast. She brings all of this experience to her work as a national lead for Believers Bailout and their efforts to imagine a world that is healthy, safe, and just for us all. And next, we'll be joined by Sana Ali, who graduated from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2018 with a bachelor's degree in marketing. She's worked for more than a year in HR benefits management, and she joined BBO in late 2019 and has since helped the organization design a new logo. She helps to manage the organization's social media presence, which if you haven't caught it this Ramadan, they've just been killing it there, and designs graphics for BBO. In 2020, she was the head of the organization's art committee, which we'll hear a lot more about tonight, aiming to get more artists from across the country involved with Believers Bailout and supporting the organization through their art. Thank you so much to you both for joining us this tonight and this afternoon on the West Coast.
Thank you for having us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk terms. Kamilah, I'm going to throw this to you. How do you define mass incarceration, and what on earth is money bail and money bond?
So mass incarceration is the result of over-policing and over-criminalizing communities, specifically Black and Brown communities, and using punitive measures to do so, jail and prison. And it is part of how the prison industrial complex operates. And so the prison industrial complex is a web of everything that touches everything that is part of the carceral state, right? And so you think of like the school to prison pipeline, where kids are being introduced into the carceral state at school. They are policed at school and sent to juvenile detention centers. Adults, there are elderly people who have been in prison for decades and decades as a result of being sentenced as juveniles. So mass incarceration is awful and bad. And bail is basically a system that targets poor people. When people are arrested before they are tried, before their innocence or guilt is decided, they are held for a fee. And so people who are poor and cannot pay that fee have to remain incarcerated until their trial. And with the way the system works, it could be weeks, it's never weeks, it's months, and it's often years. And the only reason that they are incarcerated is because they can't afford not to be. Right. So everything about that is unjust. And that is why that is the focus of the work that BBO does.
Thank you for that. So speaking of the work that you do, can you just walk us through what your process looks like?
So as you mentioned, we started our work in Cook County Jail. And so our process there is more defined. But basically what we do is let people who are incarcerated know that we exist. Right after we have fundraised and we have funds, we let them know that we exist and they are able to apply for support. We have a process where we review the case to see if they meet our criteria, to see if we can pay, and then we do so when they're eligible and when we have the funds, we post bond. The difference between us and other bond funds is that we provide post-release support, which is very important for us. We make sure that the people who are returning to their community have the resources they need to fight their case, to be healthy and safe while they're doing so. So we link them with supports in the community, and we continue to advocate by their side until the resolution of their case.
Yeah, I mean, how long is a process like that usually?
It really depends. There is no set term, which is why everything about it is unjust, right? So people can be let out and still have electronic monitoring. And that carries a whole other set of problems with it because you have to pay for that, right? It limits where people can go, who they can be around. And it basically is just another way to bring them right back into the system. They're not free until they're released of that. So we have people that we've been working with since 2018, since we started. But our goal is not to advocate for people, we advocate with people. And so our goal is to make sure that the people who have been incarcerated, who are returning to community, that we're helping them with the supports they need, but that we're also making them a part of BBO's community so that, they're able to advocate for themselves. So that when we have opportunities like this, it's not just our voices that you're hearing. You're not just hearing the volunteers' voices. You're hearing their voices as well, because who better to tell their story than they?
Yeah, that's, and thinking about right now, people, as we're fasting and social distancing, not having our normal gatherings right now, you can't help but think about people who are fasting behind bars, right? Who will be coming up on Eid and still be incarcerated. And so even as we're, adjusting to what our Eid celebration looks like, it's just, it's really just devastating to imagine that people will be celebrating or observing Eid, without their families and because they're incarcerated. So, we mentioned that we're in the last 10 nights. So I want to talk about sort of the Muslim angle here. There's a long tradition in our religious history and our religious culture to free people from bondage. So could you talk a little bit about, the inspiration behind Believers Bailout? I mean, what a powerful name, and like why this is an issue that Muslims specifically should get involved with.
Because our religion is one of justice, right? Like, we believe in justice as a foundational part of our religion, that you help those who are in bondage. The system of bondage that existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ is very different from what exists now, right? They are not the same thing. And we are called upon to help people who have financial need, who have physical need. That's a part of our mandate. And so, I believe that doing this work is part of how I express my faith, because as a Muslim, as a believer, there are certain people who can demand that of me, right? We have obligations to each other as believers, as Muslims. We have obligations to our wider community as examples of Muslims. And so there are people who can demand help of us. And we believe that those are people who are in bondage, people who cannot pay their way out of that.
Definitely. And, you all have gotten a lot of press coverage over the last few years. And one of the things that's been really encouraging to read is, in Teen Vogue, I'm reading about zakat, right? Like, what an unexpected and unusual thing to happen. I know Teen Vogue got super woke, but I think, the last thing I expected to see was like a really good explanation about what zakat is and how it works and how it is connected to, freeing people from bondage. So I'd love to hear, I'd love for you to share with our, people who've joined us tonight about how zakat plays into this, especially as people are considering where they might spend their zakat dollars in these last 10 nights.
Right. So I will start off by saying that BBO is zakat eligible. Right. We've gone through the process with Islamic scholars to make sure that we are eligible to receive your zakat donations. And we use those funds specifically for bailing people out, right? Like, it's not for operational costs, administrative costs. It is specifically used to bail people out. There are, I think, 8 categories where zakat can be used. I will not embarrass myself by trying to list all of them.
They are well laid out.
They're well laid out in multiple places. I will just say that the 2 categories that we believe that our work falls up under is 1, freeing people from bondage, but 2, people who are being held in pretrial and ICE and incarceration because they can't pay. They're eligible for zakat funds anyway, right? Because of their financial situation. And so we think it's those 2 things. There's a much better explanation on our website, though, if you are
a really great explanation on the website.
All out, so you don't have to worry. We have put a lot of time into thinking about this because we want to make sure that we are using people's zakat money responsibly.
Wonderful. So let's talk art, Sana. Like, we know, Kamilah, that you identify as an artist and storyteller, and we've had these really amazing conversations about not only how you all use art, but you have like artistic practice that's really important. But I do want to talk about the call for art, and can you talk us through sort of like the call for artists, and then we can talk a little bit more just about how BBO uses art more broadly in the work that you do.
Yeah, of course. So obviously, we do know that art and activism are so heavily tied together when it comes to any big movement or social change. And BBO recognizes this, and that's why we thought this art call would be a perfect opportunity to use art in inspiring and in motivating people towards action, inshallah. That was one of the main goals. And we know that art invokes such a strong emotional response, so it can be a very powerful tool for social change. And right now you're looking at a few pieces that were submitted. We received a great a great response from artists from across the country, alhamdulillah. A few of the other goals included being able to build connections with artists across the country and even internationally who support the work that BBO does, and to hopefully create more general exposure for our organization in the process, especially leading up to our Ramadan programs and our fundraising. And we also wanted to use the collected art pieces in furthering BBO's cause, again, to hopefully inspire pieces with the different perspectives and the stories that were being told and shared through the artwork. And we asked the artists to think about the world we live in today and how we want that to change. And so this year's theme was Reimagining Community, as you mentioned before. And it's also the overall Ramadan campaign theme. And specifically in the prompt, we included the statistic that over $182 billion each year is spent towards mass incarceration in the US. So we wanted these artists to think about how they would want to reimagine our communities to have that funding instead. So we really wanted to hopefully inspire them with this theme, to think about how they want the world to change, alhamdulillah. And we received a lot of really good responses. Yeah, and I guess to talk about some of the nuts and bolts, the timeline for the art call started in March. So we started accepting submissions from March to mid-April. And then we had a week of voting. And beginning this Ramadan, we started to announce the winners. So far we've announced the third place winners, the second place winner, and the first place winner will be announced, inshallah, in a few weeks. So we're receiving a lot of good feedback and a lot of excitement around the art that was submitted, and you can check out all of the 21 featured artwork pieces on our website at believersbailout.org//call-for-art. So yeah, definitely check that out if you can, and you can read all the descriptions behind it and see kind of the thought process behind each artist's piece. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, highly recommend looking. Just reading some of the descriptions was almost as powerful as seeing some of those pieces, you know. And it's just such a visually stunning, you know, collection. So it's just really, it's really amazing to see. And I think, you know, there's a lot that's said about, you know, narrative change. It's sort of a buzzword, especially in the nonprofit and like fundraising world now. Storytelling and, you know, artivism. These are all like real buzzwords. But I'd love to, you know, just get into a little bit how, you know, this is one piece of how you all use artistic expression and storytelling in your work. And I know, you know, I saw some incredible poets featured in the Day of Action on May 1st. You all have, I mean, I was really, really stunned. I had to go look up one of the poets, like all of her work, like as far back as I could find. But also, you know, just you've talked a little bit about how that's just important to your, you know, everyday process. So I'd love to hear a little bit more. You know, I'd love for you to share with our viewers and listeners just how that factors into this imagination process and how you think of art being integral to the work that you do.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I guess I would just say that for the artists to share their experiences, for the audience to listen to that requires connection and empathy and being able to understand. And I think that's how, well, I feel BBO leads their organization. It's led with empathy, it's led with encouragement, and it's led with listening to the people that are incarcerated and Muslims sharing their stories about the injustice. So it starts with that, I would say.
Yeah, and Kamilah, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted, you know, I think that people like to make divisions between, you know, activism and scholarship, or activism and art, and activism and right. And the downside to that is that you discount people who have a lot to bring to a movement and to a moment. And so for us, it made sense to do that. I don't know if it's because several of us consider ourselves artists, right? But in particular, like in thinking about the Day of Action and what we wanted to present, so there's two things we want to do. We want to raise money, right? Like, don't get that wrong. We absolutely need to raise money so that we can do the very, very important and critical work of freeing Muslims from incarceration. But the parallel thing that we want to do is amplify and start conversations about abolition. Artists are and have always been integral to social movements. They are the people who capture the moment, right? They tell us, people who are looking back, what that moment was like. So whether it is a book, right, or it is a piece of art, or it is a song, even if it's a dance, right? Like Alvin Ailey was capturing moments. The Harlem Renaissance captured moments. We know about those moments because of the artists that lived during those times, right? And so we believe that it was essential for us to include artists because they have something to say about the moment. They have something to say about mass incarceration. They have something to say about the carceral system as a whole. And they did so during the Day of Action, right? And so it was very important for us to include that. It's important for us to be thinking about that in the work that we do, because who better to tell a story of what a community can look like than a writer? Who better to envision that than an artist? Who better to capture and tell you what it is and what it could look like, right? That's how you kind of crystallize what's happening around you. I think artists do that.
Yeah, I mean, you just gave me chills when you were just talking about, and I've even heard you say this before, but just something about, just this is how you know what was happening, right? And I was thinking about Stevie Wonder's birthday yesterday, and I've been just jamming out to Stevie all day, but it's, I wasn't there when he wrote some of his most like powerful movement songs, but they sort of just like live in me.
And you feel it, right?
He's saying
like
them,
Black
right?
people all over the world sing a whole different version of the happy birthday song. Oh,
100%.
And like, you don't even remember why you're singing it, but the song was written because of Martin Luther King's birthday, trying to make it a holiday, right? Who is thinking about that? But it's such an integral part of our culture, right? Yeah. Just something as simple as that. So like, what would we know about so much that happened if we didn't have Stevie Wonder? Like, what would we know, right?
My 2-year-old doesn't know another version of that song. So I mean, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with that. As I'm hearing you talk, I just wanted to share also and interject a little bit. There's an artist, Jesse Crimes, who works with a lot of other activists, sort of in some circles that Pillars is involved with. And one of the most powerful workshops that I've done was with him. He's formerly incarcerated and was in solitary confinement for quite a long time. And he did this print transfer using hair gel from the commissary, a plastic spoon, and bed sheets. And he'd take newsprint and use the gel with the plastic spoon and like rub the imprint onto the bed sheets, and then had this massive mural that now is exhibited in different places with other artists who are formerly incarcerated. So the Soze Foundation is an organization that supports a lot of artists who are formerly incarcerated, and Jesse was one of the first to work with them. But there was something so just visceral. There's something about doing that with your hands, smelling the like LA Looks hair gel, feeling the paper, feeling the newsprint, and like the pressure of pushing the ink into the bed sheet, that like really stuck with me. And as we're doing this, this very tactile exercise, he and another artist were talking about the experiences that they had being incarcerated and like what it took for them to get out. And Jesse happens to be white. And so he was talking about all the privileges that, even though he was in solitary, like all the privileges and how he was able to like move through the system a lot easier than his colleague who was with him, who was Black and similarly an artist and works with animal blood, who we did not actually get to do that. But there's this really powerful pieces that just come to life when you have the experience of doing them, in the way that they might have been done. Anyway, I forgot about that until you were talking about that, but there is such a connection to like the body and the spirit as you're like creating, and that's just an experience that I had that I will never forget.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think this is a great time to talk about the theme of this year's campaign for BBO. Are you still trying to raise $100,000? Let's just put that number out there. Is that the goal?
Yes, we would love to raise $150,000.
150, let's name it and claim it.
Mashallah, $150,000. Like I'm gonna do like an imam fundraising spiel. Yes.
He'll lock you in your own homes.
Yes, it's just like you cannot leave. That is the number we would like to raise. Because the more money we raise, the more people we're able to free. And we do we free people from jails and prisons, but also ICE. And those tend to be more expensive, right? And so, yes.
Yeah, so this reimagining then, to get to this. So we need to do that. We need to, get people out right now. But what you all are trying to do goes well beyond, bailing individual people out, which is incredibly important. But, let's talk about the theme of this year's campaign, Reimagining Community. And I, of course, think that's really beautiful. And you want to dismantle things. We want to break things. Sometimes like right now, because things that are happening in the world are so infuriating. But let's also just talk about what that means to build and reimagine a healthy, safe, just community, a place where we can all be and exist. How did you come up with the theme?
Well, so we had our first retreat in December of last year in Chicago. And we had the retreat so that we could figure out how we move forward as an organization, but then also how we build community as a group of volunteers. Because we are all volunteers. There's a critical mass in Chicago, but we have people spread out in different places. And so a lot of the stuff that we do virtually. So it was a chance for us to come together and figure out who we wanted to be as an organization. And then that dictated the theme, right? We know that everyone may not call themselves an abolitionist. People get a little sketchy around terms. We're going to push you in that direction, but I think people think of abolition as just like you said, as breaking something. You're getting rid of the system, you're getting rid of policing, you're getting rid of jails, and it sounds like anarchy, right? Like, what do you have once you get rid of all of that? And while I'm not saying that is not what we eventually would like to see, for us, it's more about what are we building, right? What are the systems that we are building in order to make people feel safe, in order to address ills that happen, right? What are we doing in order to prevent them from happening in the first place? Right? Like, what do we build? What do we affirmatively do in order to create the type of safe, healthy, and just community that we would like to live in? And that starts with us building community with each other, right? Like, you have to show up as your authentic self to be part of a community. Being part of community is hard work. It's not easy, right? You're navigating other people and their authentic selves. So doing that is a process, but it's a process worth doing if the alternative is what we have now, which isn't working for anyone, right? And it's not, I think people think, well, it doesn't really concern me. Like, I'm not incarcerated. I don't know anybody that's incarcerated, or people that are incarcerated are, bad people. That's not how this works, right? Because if we just be in 100, all bad people aren't in jail. and all people that are in jail are not bad, right? Like we're not thinking of it that way. So it's about what we want to build. And for us, that was where the theme came from. We're just reimagining the communities that we live in. And we're asking people, what would your community look like if instead of, the hundreds of thousands of dollars they spent on jailing people, they put into education, or they put into feeding people or housing people, right? What if instead of militarizing your local police force, they spent that money to make sure the neighborhoods were safe in the ways that they wanted to be safe, right? Like, what do they need in order to feel as though they're safe? And I bet it's not, like police with tanks, like said nobody ever, nobody ever. Right? So it's about what could you do instead of what is happening now. That's what we mean by reimagining community. What could it look like? And if you can envision what this looks like, then the next thing you do is start to build it. Right? The next thing you do is take the steps needed to make that a reality. And it is a huge task that seems insurmountable, but that's only if you're not working in community, because everybody has a part to do. Everybody has a part to play, and no part is undervalued, right? So if all you can do is donate zakat money, if all you can do is donate sadaqah, you're doing enough, right? You're doing your part, and we will gladly accept it, right? If all you can do is write a letter to someone who's incarcerated, then do that, right? If all you can do is just have a conversation with the people closest to you about this, and start to challenge people's thinking when they use terminology like bad and good people, or when they, say things like, oh, they should lock that person up and throw away the key, or, to start to challenge those ideas with the people closest to you, then you're doing something. You are starting to envision something other than what exists now.
Yeah, I was thinking about Noura Maznavi's Instagram takeover on your account. If you haven't checked it out, check the highlights. They've got somebody taking over the BBO Instagram account every day. But when she was talking to her girls, and thinking about how we have this conversation so early, when you talk about good and bad, those things, and I have kids, those things are so entrenched so early. That's a good person, that's a bad person. Yeah. Playing cops and robbers, in the park. And then we see that doesn't turn out well, right? Like I mentioned, I have a 2-year-old, but I also have a 14-year-old boy here in Chicago. So, we talk about Trayvon, we talk about Tamir, right? These are parts of our everyday conversations. And when we talk about good and bad, it gets really heavy really quickly. So I was really appreciative of Noura to sort of, her girls are little preschool, and having those conversations so early kind of helps, disrupt that, earlier rather than later, because it's really stuck for a lot of us already. It's baked, right? And we have to unlearn so much of what we've learned. And I think about that also with the structure. The way that BBO works is really dissimilar to a lot of organizations that we work with. And it's neither good nor bad for the other groups that we work with, but you all do approach the work in a really sort of rare working model, which I think is really key to like how and why you do your work. So I think for those who aren't familiar, could you share a little bit? We hear, what does it mean when you say like a national collective of volunteers, right? Like none of y'all getting paid, right? Like what does that, what does that look like? Is that sustainable? How do you come together? Like, how do you make decisions if like no one is quote unquote in charge, right? Like, what does this look like to work in collective? And, how is it to work through that process together on such a heavy topic?
Sana, you want to answer?
Yeah, I can just speak from my experience. I guess I joined last year at the end of 2019 in October, and I can just say that I was welcomed immediately. I felt so welcomed and so encouraged from the start to get involved and just kind of get hands-on with any project that interests me or any skill set that I had. Just try and find where I can apply it and just kind of pick up and run with it. And I was mentored and encouraged along the way from so many of the different leaders in the organization already, and I just felt very supported and very welcomed. And everyone there is just so smart and so driven and so focused on helping each other and helping the people that are incarcerated and just educating people on what's going on and amplifying the different stories. So yeah, it's alhamdulillah been a great experience for me so far, and it's led with empathy and with encouragement and support. So yeah.
It is an intentional effort, right? Like we're not doing it haphazardly. We try to be very thoughtful with how we approached this model of organizing. We want it to be ethical. We want it to be welcoming, and we wanted to lead with compassion and use a model. I think so many of us have volunteered so many other places, right? So we have a wealth of experiences of maybe what we would not like to see. So it was very intentional to do it this way, because our goal is to kind of work ourselves out of a job, right? And so if that is your goal, then you're not vested in having one person always be the spokesperson, right? Like everybody who volunteers and spends their time, and we do all volunteer, no one is getting paid, right? So everyone who is part of this is giving us something precious and valuable, their time, their energy, when they could be spending it doing something else, their expertise, because everybody has some level of expertise in something. So when people are generous with themselves, then the way that you keep them is by being equally generous, right? With your compassion, with your time, and making it so that everyone has a stake in this, right? So this is so important that it can't be led by one person. We all have to do it, right? It's too important for it just to be Kamilah or for it just to be Sana. It has to be a group of us doing this. This is not to say that it isn't challenging, right? Because we are in different places. We have a lot of meetings. we have a lot of group texts. We got a lot going on in the Slack channel, right? But alhamdulillah, we make it work because we are all vested in this, because it is something that we believe, not just for the moment, but we believe this as an expression of our faith. So for us, it's worth it to do this, even when it's hard, even when we're tired, even when we agree to be on camera for 12 hours for some reason, right? Like
that was pretty incredible.
We were never doing that again. But even when we agree to do that, it's worth it, because we believe that this is something that is an expression of our faith, and something that our fellow Muslims can demand of us.
Okay, well, we've got a few comments and questions in the chat, but before we go to that, so let's just say, like, I've been listening. It's my first time hearing, and I'm ready, right? How can I be down? Like, what would be the next steps for somebody who wants to get involved or even just wants to donate?
So for volunteering, there's so many opportunities, so many projects that are needing people's help. So we're always welcoming people's support and help in any way that they can. And whatever, if you're interested at all in volunteering, we encourage you to visit our website first and foremost, and also email volunteer@believersbailout.org. And some of the things you can get involved with are letter writing, for example. You can join the Pen Pal program and write letters to the people we're in contact with at CCJ or Cook County Jail or any other jail that we're in communication with. Or you can get involved with jail visitations. You can get involved with post-release support programs. And we also have people developing a curriculum for kids aged pre-K to 12th grade on mass incarceration. So if you feel like you can help in that way or develop that curriculum, there's ways you can help with that. We also have abolitionist youth coming up, which Kamilah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah, so we have a group of volunteers they've been doing this for a couple of years, but they work specifically with women incarcerated at Logan Correctional. And it is an effort to collect items to send to them so that they can celebrate Eid with some dignity. Right? So they're in the process now of figuring out how to navigate that in light of the restrictions placed in jails because of coronavirus, right? We know that the situation inside is dire, and so they need those supplies even more. I think today they just found out that they'll be able to send certain things, but there's always a negotiation. That's another thing about, prisons and jails. Muslims are often unfairly targeted inside and denied religious rights. And so, even something as simple as being able to access a Quran could be even more difficult. Having food available that they can eat that is halal, or having food that they can eat in time to fast, right? Like all of those things are a negotiation every time. And so the group that is doing the incarcerated Eid is currently working on getting supplies to women at Logan Correctional.
Yeah, that's related to one of the questions actually that we had, which was, does Believers Bailout currently have any efforts that support and amplify the struggles of women who are incarcerated?
Yes, so that is the most immediate one. But men and women can apply for our funds if they're incarcerated. So it is not just for men, it's for women as well. Because, women also get caught up in the carceral system, and women also get snatched up by ICE. And so when I'm having this conversation anyway, I am talking about men and women. But yes, that is our one effort that is specifically directed towards incarcerated women.
There is another question. So here we go. What are some of the ways that we could redistribute funds from militarizing police to make neighborhoods safer? And what are some of those steps that we could take?
I feel like you could do a whole lot with the cost of a tank. But so what is happening now in the time of Corona is people have started mutual aid collectives or organizations where they're basically relying on their community to give them the sort of supports they need in order to weather this storm. Another thing that people do is called community potting. And that is basically where you, one, have to know your neighbors, the people that live around you, right? And as a collective, you decide that if something happens, these are the people that you can call in the neighborhood to come and support you. So if someone, is being abused in their home and they don't want to call the police, right? The answer is not for them to let the abuse continue. The answer then is to be able to rely on someone in their community to come to their aid. And so community potting is mapping out who's in your community, what types of resources they have available, what supports they're willing to give, right? And it's kind of a way to figure out how, as neighbors, you can be responsible to and for each other. So that is a way. But all of those things are things that communities themselves do. It's not something that you're relying on the state to do, because in most instances, when it comes to safety, the state is not the good actor, right? And so they could redistribute those funds into public works, into public schools, into just making the communities themselves, as far as the infrastructure, safer. So more parks, right? Buildings that are not crumbling down around people, that are not filled with lead. Or you could just, instead of militarizing your police, you can give the people in Flint clean water, right? There are tons of things you can do instead of spending money on police.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share one comment from the Facebook comments here, and then give you, as I'm reading this, give you a chance to think about maybe a recommendation that you would give if somebody wants to learn more, if they want to read a book, watch a film, listen to a podcast episode. But there's somebody in the comments who said, Kamilah, your words earlier reminded them of Toni Morrison's quote, "This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal." And then they said, "Thank you, Believers Bailout, for centering artists in the prison abolition movement." So I think that's a beautiful quote. And with that, are there artists, writers, thinkers, academics, speakers that you would recommend for people if they want to dive into this a little bit more?
So Believers Bailout has an abolition reading group, right? We have two. We have one in Chicago and we have one in DC. And they have an awesome reading list. If you go to, I believe the information might be on the website, but if it is not, then you can definitely find the information on our social media, either the Facebook, the Twitter, or the IG. They will post when they're having meetings, and because can't nobody go nowhere now, they're on Zoom anyway, right? So you can hop in a Zoom and see the list and also have a conversation. But, Miriam Kaba is wonderful, and she has zines and workbooks. Ruth Ann Gilmore, like there are a bunch of people. Our Prison's Obsolete. Like there's a bunch of work out there. The reading group has put this together in a more coherent way, and so check out our social media to find them in their next meeting, and the list of stuff that they recommend to read.
Yeah, Sana, do you have any recs?
I was listening to a podcast with Miriam Kaba the other day. So that's just something I thought of. But yeah, definitely check out the reading groups that BBO offers.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just one more question because I thought we were gonna wrap up, but Shayla's got one that we didn't specifically address, and I don't want to miss the opportunity since we've got you on here. So how can we actively engage allies / co-conspirators in our mosques to mobilize around these issues and encourage nuance in conversations about how this is tethered to anti-Blackness? Little question to close this out.
Short, easy answer. So I believe that you have the most influence with the people that you know most intimately, right? So the work of, challenging racists, if they're not my people, that's not my work. So first thing is get your people, like talk to your people. If you are sitting around the family table and somebody is saying something that is just like anti-Black, and that is like pro-military or pro-policing, say something, right? The best way to engage the people that are closest to you, so do that, right? I think that would be like the first level before people even get to the masjid wilding out. But then the other thing is to have honest conversations about what you know. Like everybody doesn't have to, and we talk about this as a group. Everybody is not going to be able to hit people with facts and figures, right? To have a whole long list of reasons why they shouldn't talk about these issues or why anti-Blackness is wrong, right? You talk about it in the way that you best know how. But I think that is a huge issue. And I am glad the BBO puts that in the forefront, right? Because when we talk about freeing people from prisons, a lot of people in Muslim communities assume that, or we're just talking about Black people in jail, and they probably did something to be there anyway. So why is it something I need to be concerned about? And it wasn't until we started talking about ICE that others in the community were like, oh, well, that sounds like something that impacts me, so maybe I should be concerned. No. You should be concerned about it all, right? So anti-Blackness is not just my problem because I'm Black, right? It is something that impacts everybody, and it is everybody's issue to deal with, some more than others. And it has to be a conversation that's deeper than just, oh, Muslims aren't racist, or there's no racism in Islam, because we know that's not true, right? So you have to be able to name a thing and call it out, and have conversations that go beyond Bilal and beyond like Malcolm on his birthday, right? Or beyond like the one Black person that you think is your friend. You got to have conversations beyond that. And you do that by talking to the people that you know best and getting your people if you see them being racist.
Getting your people if you see them being racist. I think
like get your people. That's not
words to live by. Get your people if you see them being racist. I can work on that. Thank you both so much. If we have follow-up questions and conversations, we'll shoot them your way, and we'd love to continue this conversation on social media and in other channels. But thank you both so much for being with us tonight, and also just for the work that you do and that BBO is doing, and the path that you're carving for so many of us to learn and follow. So I wanted to remind our viewers that we're here every Thursday, same time, same place. Catch us here on Facebook Live. Next week, we'll be with Arish and Omar Afandam talking about storytelling as healing. So really continuing this conversation about how we use art and artistic expression to heal. And specifically in this case, will be poetry and reading. And you definitely won't want to miss that. And then we'll continue with another poet and social commentator, Hanif Abdurraqib, on Thursday, May 28th. And then rounding that out for this part of our series, June 4th, Rami Youssef from Pen to Screen will get a little bit of a behind the scenes look at how he and some of the writers on the season 2 of his show did what they did and how they created a whole nother season. So thank you all for joining us. We really wish you and your families and your loved ones a really blessed last 10 nights of Ramadan. And we hope to see you here again next week on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much. And Assalamu alaikum.